Right, I'm going to call the January 27th, 2022 meeting of the Equity, Diversity, and Justice Committee. Board of Education. I'm calling the order at
Here.
Deborah,
Here.
Liz,
Here.
Sarah, and Janice are here. David's not here. And if have any comments at this time? So, first thing I'd like to do is welcome our two new members. We haven't had a meeting since October, so we do have a very large agenda, but my hope tonight is that we go through in some detail items 1, 2, a little bit. We want to talk about item 3, so we will give directions to share. And that's the report that we want to but the entire. Spend a little bit of time on, let's see, a little bit of time on the other items, but I think the main purpose there is to determine how the priorities and what we want to set as a topic for more detail in the future. The first thing I have on the agenda is the annual review of the guiding principles. As you recall, next year we decided setting some priorities that we do an annual review after the 1st of January. The guiding principles that were originally adopted on December 1st of 2020. So just over a year in. My hope was that does everybody have a copy or have access to a copy of that? What I wanted to do is get your thoughts about looking at the guiding principles, what we've done, what we think we need to focus on, if there's areas we haven't focused on, what we should be prioritizing going forward. And then I also have a one item I'd like to raise as at least an understanding and potentially an amendment. But I want to hear what you have to say before. So I'm opening up to anybody who has any thoughts or ideas or suggestions. Okay.
Well, I guess my first comment would be that I know it seems like we've been doing this for a long time, but I feel that we just started our work here, and I think in coordination with the administration and the staff here at EO Smith, that to change up or change our focus or kind of even manipulate or amend, whatever word you want to use, the guiding principles at this point in time, I don't know if that's a good idea. I feel that I would almost prefer to give ourselves at least another 6 months to see where we're at by the end of the school year. And I also, I guess, as you're asking that question, I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to go back to the other document. I think that, that Lou and others put together in terms of what some of those goals were that the school is actually working on right now, or if they go along with these guiding principles. It's a loaded question.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
I agree completely. I wouldn't touch this.
Okay. I'm going to still challenge you with one thing as we go forward. But let's hear what everybody else has.
I'm ready for the challenge. Okay.
Anybody else have any thoughts? All right. One of the things that our guiding principles do not address directly and arguably it's hard even to get it indirectly. It's gender inequity. And I feel that a year in, that's a big enough omission that it's worth at least discussing whether we should add something to the guiding principles. Or at a minimum, acknowledge that we are going to address gender equity, gender inequity within the context. Guiding principles. My preference, I kind of went back and forth on this. I agree with you, Janice. I don't want to change these things. But the more I thought about it, and today is the second anniversary of Virginia adopted the Equal Rights Amendment. I think it should be the day, arguably, that the Equal Rights Amendment goes into effect as part of the Constitution. We have been dealing with this omission in our society, in our educational system, in law for well over 100 years. So I guess I would throw out that at least I think that's something worth considering. I think it would be a minor change. It could be accomplished, I think, in the third point that we have in our pledge. And I actually have drafted some language which I can show you all people take a look at. Again, I feel like we shouldn't be tweaking these things willy-nilly or just, but I think this is a big issue. I think gender inequity is a very big issue. It should be addressed. It should be called out. I think, Lou, you were saying even at the last meeting that I think some of this see the recognition, and I think there's just a lot of things that are by omission, not necessarily intentional, but I do think that, look, I'm going to go back well over 10 years ago, but we experienced it directly in our in some areas, which is not the job of math, like we discouraged from doing it because the guys are really sharp. Hard to keep up. Now, that was 10 years ago. I don't know if that, but it was still happening then, and it wasn't that you couldn't do it, it's that you had to work hard and you should work. I can pass out my proposed amendment if we want to look at it. We can talk about it, we can table it. We can decide if we want to just make a general resolution acknowledging it as an issue.
It's the wordsmithing, to be inclusive of, but what are we going to say, Jen? It's not gender identification. What are
I'm going to
your
pass
words?
it out. Okay.
I think that's the way to go.
And it's just, this is a suggestion.
Yeah, I like it a lot, but I just don't know quite how to put it into.
And it has a preamble, just what we can discuss.
But as someone identifies as a female, I mean, and maybe I'm totally missing it, but under the, the third bullet here, I guess I felt very included. And I felt this spoke to me also, so I don't know, maybe, and it says our students with disabilities, and any members of our community who are survivors of unjust and inequitable practices.
I think that if we're not going to amend it, that's where we would focus.
Yeah.
That's our charge to make it something we do. And
I guess, the other thing I will say also is that, this started really with Black Lives Matter. And I think that the more we add to this, we start losing some of that focus, I think. And I guess I don't want to forget that. It's too easy to forget. There's already talk of a lot of pushback, and I don't know what the right terminology is. I'm trying to, there's some buzzwords out there that the media uses, but people who who are Black or are individuals of color, part of that specific community, there's already pushback against some of the things that have started happening, i.e. don't teach critical race theory in our schools kind of thing, even though that's not what's being done. So I just have to, I'm trying to be mindful about that too. And yeah.
So that's a really good point, because I was, when we open up gender, then do we open up to religious differences, other categories? But now Janice is reminding us of the origins and
I think all of those things could fit within that last clause, citizenship status. Interestingly, if you look at the Connecticut State Board of Education policy, which they specifically mention gender, ethnic origin, social class, religion, and all of which can fit under that category.
right.
I think my question is well, first of all, I think, Janice, I get your point, but I also think that our charge as a committee, while the concerns of Black Lives Matter are very important, and they get prominent places for several paragraphs to address specific. We as a committee must also be looking at our entire community. And it's also the case that some of the most egregious instances, at least in our society, of gender inequity are women of color. I don't think it is a deviation. Again, I struggled with that as well. I don't think that's a deviation from our focus. I think it is another layer that if you're a person of color and you're a woman, or you're not, straight, I think just it adds a whole additional level. And some of these things don't necessarily just relate to things that are happening in school, but it's preparing our students to go out into the world and what they're going to have to confront. There's still a very serious discrepancy in pay and wages.
I support this amended version. And I understand what you're saying, and I get that all the time in groups like, Black organizations or working for Black justice. But we are working for everybody here. And if we have injustice for anybody, it's injustice for everybody. So I like this. I appreciate it. I like how you were focusing on not making everybody try to fit, like you were talking about. Like your daughter wanted to be in math. I do remember being the only person in chemistry classes in college. So that was a female that identified as a female. And so I kind of like it. And I'll stop so Morgan can have a chance.
I'm sure. I mean, I think when I read this the first time, to me, it was very clearly about BIPOC students. I mean, the introduction, the lead-in, and then I was wondering why LGBTQIA plus and disabilities were highlighted as opposed to some other groups. So I'm sure there's a lot of discussion about that, et cetera. But so it did strike me that there were groups omitted. And I think there are many groups, as you said, Tony, that could be added to this list. But I think given that girls make up 50% of the school, it seems like a pretty big omission not to have them have gender included. And I agree that the gender discrimination can go unnoticed. There's some, I think a belief in some circles that we're beyond that, but we're not at all. And so it's, goes back to that example of last week last meeting from Dan Ariano with the records outside the locker room, and no one had noticed. And I've had incidents like that happen to me where I didn't even notice. And And so I would support the amendment as well.
I agree. I would support the amendment. It's, the addition of these words just makes it more well-rounded, so. The vegans aren't taken into consideration here, though.
Vegans, yeah.
I think we still have that additional clause at the end, and as I said, I don't think I would want to say, and vegan, but I mean, when they're having population.
But we're talking about whatever, you know, you identify. That's another thing that I think, you know, just imagine if I live long enough to see where nobody asks what your gender is. I mean, that's a great possibility.
And we'll all be these.
We'll be one older. No, I think I'm still going to be a female. I mean, I'll just be an old fashioned model.
So do you, you probably read more carefully the Connecticut State Board of Ed, that's what you started referring to, because, you know, kind of opened up and it didn't really read it carefully, but this keeps us more in line with what that is. Your amendments.
Yeah, I think it keeps us, it doesn't pick up all of those terms, and I didn't think I wanted to. I think I wanted to talk about gender, because I thought that gender, I mean, it occurred to me like halfway through the year, it's kind of not address gender. I mean, we addressed it in the context of people are gay and gender identity, but not which is, I mean, how did it get left out of the 40? How did it get left out of the Constitution? Keeps getting overlooked. I think it's important to, and I think it cuts across every other concern in different kinds of address, because I think, again, if you're a black woman or you're a Hispanic woman, it's that much harder. In some ways, I guess you could say that that is not a problem. Well, but, and again, it's not just in school, it's that preparing our students to go out into the world where there's still large discrepancies. It's hard to get pay equity laws. Yeah. And the ones we have are just saying you can talk about it. So, that's why I thought it was worth considering an amendment. And again, I don't have any sort of pride of authorship of the wording. If anybody who even supports it would like to change it.
The only thing that I see, because I'm going past the two models that, you know, everybody probably started out believing that you're either male or female at one time in this generation, perhaps. Yeah. But maybe instead of saying, you see in the bold in the last paragraph,
Yep.
members of our community arising from or as a result of their gender. I think identification, and just that word, because some people do not consider themselves a specific gender. They're, as you said, they, or there are a lot of other words that
Well,
describe their situation.
I just wondered if that was picked, if most of that was picked up by the LGBT.
I think it is.
I think it is.
Yeah, I think it is.
You guys can do what you want, but I like identification, you know, as one's identification.
How does anybody else feel about that? I feel like it
Well, they
dilutes,
like it as it is.
I feel like it dilutes the concept a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's
want to make
covered.
sure it's not just, it's just gender, because gender identification, your gender identification, and the rest of them views you two different things.
Yes, it is.
I do think the language should be changed a little bit because it's a little awkward
Yeah, it
between
is a little
community and arising. So it could be something like community who experience injustice arising from or as a result of their gender or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're to experience. Yep.
All right.
Experience, but
The unjust treatment or something like that.
we said, we
says it is-
started the whole thing out with discrimination, ethical practices. identified by LGBTQIA disabilities, ending members of our community experience. I don't know. Inequitable practice, inequitable.
You've got that at the end. I think the problem is punctuation.
Yeah,
Because what you're saying here is that any members of the community who, as a result of their gender, you can probably even take out the arising from,
yeah, I think you could just say as a result of their
yeah,
gender.
because that's just a
I was
form.
trying to keep it within, I was trying to change as little as possible what
Mhm.
we already had, with preferred drafts, but rewrite the whole thing. But
I think any members of our community as a result
Result.
of their gender.
Yeah,
yeah, why don't we just do that? Yeah, I think.
Oh, yeah, that works.
Yeah. it's just an awkward form.
And again,
If we were
Yeah.
gonna, do it, you know, you would be able to make those.
I have the resolution to the board right now. That doesn't have the,
Yeah, yeah, I mean, we should make the same change in the resolution to the board. And my
any members of our community.
as a result of my thought was that we were to adopt this resolution tonight.
Yeah.
The statement of the next meeting.
Yeah.
The board resolution doesn't go into law, it just basically says we have, we're recommending that they approve.
What the state has included, gender.
State has said,
Religion, nationality, status of
let's see,
citizenship.
regardless of race, ethnic origin, gender, social class, ability, religion, or sexual.
Are any of those concerns in the school? I feel, I kind of feel that it should be included, but maybe that's not a. Well, that's, I feel like we're gonna add some other
Yep.
categories, and why are we not making inclusive of all?
Because I was looking at this too, and I was like, well, maybe we should be talking about religion, maybe we should talk about nationality, maybe we should talk about.
Well, I mean,
I
we
mean,
could pick up,
nationalities, we kind of have,
we already have, well, let's see, we have, I mean, we've approached it a little differently by talking about my project.
Right, right.
And students with disabilities. So we picked up ability, we picked up,
We've got historically marginalized members.
got
of-
historically marginalized, you know, could you argue, I mean, the real question is, does that catch all at the end? Is it broad enough? And I was trying to just focus on gender and say, the rest of these, I think we will certainly address, and they're there. Anyone who's practices. I don't know what we've had in school. We had a lot of attention to other things.
Religion, so
Yeah, okay.
That's what I was thinking.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's, yeah, okay. Well, sure, what do we want to add? We want to add on.
nationality.
Ethnic origin. I don't know. I mean, once we don't have. or- Social class. then we have sexual preference.
Yeah.
Social class an issue.
socioeconomic.
Absolutely.
So maybe we say that's socioeconomic status, class. I mean, I'm open to just so that, you know, something would be any members of our community. As a result of their gender, religion, ethnic origin, socioeconomic status, and against any members of our community or any other matters. Did that?
I think it's really inclusive to have it spelled out. I know it's not, but like if you are a religious minority and
Right.
you're here and you're just like, oh, I just fall under community, right? Like it's something empowering.
Well, that's right. No, I think that's, and I think then we can, you know, to the extent that there were, we're aligning it more with the State Board of Education.
But we're gonna keep that, the last phrase about survivors.
I think I want to keep that anyway.
I think that's
So
good.
if we miss it.
Yeah.
Right,
We'll
because there
we'll
are
certainly
other-
miss somebody.
Yeah, there are other categories.
So I think we would add, okay, so any members of the
Creating
community
new ones every
as a
day.
result of their gender,
Unfortunately, yes.
religion, ethnic origin, or socioeconomic status,
Yeah.
and against any members of the community. Okay, so that means, now I'm thinking about this in terms of preamble, which we can drop, we don't necessarily have to. We can simply start with, we approve and recommend for approval by the following. Section really just focuses on. So then our resolution tonight, if we approve it to be, we approve and recommend for approval by the board, Region 19 boards of following.
So I make sure I got it correct. Confront and dedicate ourselves to eradicating discrimination and equitable practices against members of our BIPOC and LGBTQI+ students with disabilities, any members of our community as a result of their gender, religious, ethnic origin, or socioeconomic status. And against those members of our community with unjust.
The board, when you're looking at it,
I'm looking at
what's the preamble to the board? I'm just saying.
Region 19 Board of Education approves and adopts the following amended pledge. The Region 19 Board of Education. Justice Statement of Guiding Principles. 1/2020 regular meeting.
I think what we would do there is starting with a key part of it. We would say, we would, for the most part, delete the whole first paragraph. We would say, we, the members of the Region 19 Board of Education Subcommittee on Equity, Diversity, and and in pledge to rate including justice statement guidelines at the December 1st, 2020. At the, why don't you say at the December. I'm just going to give you that. Use the third paragraph exactly. Just pick up this little piece of it, so you can reference further. Just this part. Yeah, here we go. It says same things here. I didn't ask if Suzanne.
Suzanne, can you unmute?
Hello?
Wondering if you have any comments or thoughts?
You didn't have the benefit of having it in front of you.
All right, thoughts about adding gender? Is that what you're asking?
We actually talked about adding gender, but now we've decided that we're aligned with the state Board of Education policy and that gender, religion, ethnic origin, those.
I'm having a hard time hearing.
Gender was referenced specifically in order to align more closely with the state board policy.
I think that's a good idea.
Okay.
Just looking at this.
Members of the 19th Board of Education. Recommended by the Region 19 Board of Education, the following amended pledge, number 3, included in the Region 19 Board of Education amended Equity, Diversity, and Justice Statement of Guiding Principles adopted at the December 1st, 2020 regular meeting. Amendments are highlighted in bold text. 3, to confront and dedicate ourselves to eradicating discrimination, inequitable practices, and intolerance directed against members of our BIPOC and LGBTQIA+ communities, our students with disabilities, any members of our community as a result of their gender, religious, ethnic origin, or socioeconomic status, and against any members of our community who in any other manner are survivors of unjust and inequitable practices.
Anyone like to make the motion?
So moved.
Second.
Liz moved the second.
Okay. Madison, Liz. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. So we will be recommending that the board adopt that resolution. March 1st. Next.
Yeah, March, well, we have February.
Yeah, February,
It's next week. It's not on the agenda, but I
We
wonder.
can bring it up.
Bring it up as a conversation.
Maybe you could have the resolution. So we can. That's the way I. I'm trying to keep us on a reasonable schedule, so, but that was probably one.
That was a record. A revision record.
All right, so if there's no other questions on that front, the JRB update, I think we got some exciting news. I think Deborah and Luke and so.
I'll just do a entry into it, and then Lou, you can take over. This now has a life of its own, which is great. The Restorative Diversion Team, which is a collaborative effort of Wilmington, Ashford, and Mansfield, is officially up and running. All 3 town councils signed the memorandums of agreement, and they are ready for referrals. So essentially, a whole bunch of other people from the youth service bureaus and the towns took charge of this, including Lou and whoever you've got designated here in the building. And, this has been in the works for a long time anyway, but the various players in the communities who wanted this to happen, including us, kicked it into gear very, very quickly. And they're ready. They've sent out their referral forms, their referral processes. I think that was part of one of the documents that we
Yeah.
sent out to you.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Yeah, and everybody's very, very excited.
Yeah, so Omar Rosari and I participated in the meeting. They went through the protocol. We took it from the state. Very clearly want to be called restorative diversion team, and that's actually going to be changed at the state level from JRB. I think to backtrack, it's important since this meeting is sort of a where are we or where have we been. So when we first adopted the SRO program, it was for school safety, right? We had heard from parents, and it was a school shooting, and we admitted that we hadn't really taken the perspective that other people don't feel safe. So we went through that process, and we sent it out to the community. You may not have put this together, but Morgan actually is the principal author or prepared that report. So, so part of that was to move away from the SRO program because we kept hearing school diversity pipeline, right? But to put in place was a social worker, which we did, and then that also put us on the, I guess, offense with the town saying, okay, kids can get arrested outside of school too. What about a youth diversion program? So I absolutely feel that it's all related, and that the progress since we moved away from the SRO program toward this is a reaction to what we did. So again, it seems like that kind of a meeting where we're sort of checking our progress. I think going back through the whole history is very, very important here, because the establishment of this board, I feel, is a cause or is the result of what we went through. It wasn't pleasant, but in the end, we feel we have a family and community services person. We also have a court diversion program. So I think we should be, very happy with this.
I am thrilled at this result. Even when we were those of us who stood before the Mansfield Town Council, it was Ben, right?
Yeah.
Who was saying we should have a majority.
Yeah.
And we kept saying, yeah, you should. They were kind of pushing back our
Yes,
and I'm really thrilled that we made it a multi-town effort. I think that is an incredible development and collaborative effort with Freetown. It sounds like everybody got on board pretty quickly, very quickly, jumped on it. And I would like to thank Lou and Deborah, who've been involved in this more directly than most of us. I think we need to thank the youth services directors of all three towns, and perhaps we could just acknowledge that in the minutes tonight, how we view that as a significant development that will enable us to realize our goals. And also for the member towns to move to a restorative justice benefit all of them. It's a great result, and it's happened more quickly than I thought it might.
Yeah, I think there's some degree of experience with youth service bureau members with this from their other jobs and from the meetings they attend in the Hartford area. I mean, it wasn't, it definitely helped to have us take a strong interest in it, but everybody's had it on their mind. And the middle school here in town is seeing an increase in issues with kids, and they're very excited about it. And it's been a great opportunity for me to be able to join that board. The Youth Service Advisory has a community board, and they look at lots of things besides this, but it's a great group. They're very efficient in their meetings. They're quick, and they're looking at a soup to nuts services for kids in our community here in Mansfield. I'm only familiar with the Youth Service Bureau here in Mansfield, but I just want to add to this because I think it's relevant. The other thing that they're pursuing out of the Mansfield Youth Service Bureau is the addition of a social worker in their budget. And partially because they're having trouble meeting needs of the elementary and middle school kids and their families, but also because they recognize there are needs beyond which the high school can manage with the adolescent population, and there aren't social worker hours to address those things. They currently do not serve teenagers directly at the Youth Service Bureau. And so they have officially put in their budget request a full-time social worker who would be used to service any of the unmet groups, but with particular emphasis on serving adolescents at the high school level from the town of Mansfield. This is a Mansfield only situation, but and a lot of things happened very quickly, including my racing over and getting thank you to Lou and Sharon for organizing their staff around letting them know that this was in the works, because otherwise they would have been asking for something that the staff here might not have been aware of right away. And everybody in the meeting that I attended was like, yeah, we definitely need more services in the community. And so it just everything has fallen into place, which is just astonishing in this environment, that anything falls into place, but it has. And the town manager seemed to indicate that there were enough extra funds in the town of Mansfield for these kinds of things. He didn't specifically mention this position, but he alluded to the fact that there would be the addition of personnel as a result of the funds that the town has at this point. So all very excited, very excited.
So Deb, there has been one social worker position, right, in the town of Mansfield?
Oh, they've got several people,
Several,
but they don't
but they're
serve
not focused on
teenagers.
kids
Right.
or middle school kids.
They have not served teenagers, and they got their hands full
Yeah.
as it is. And their biggest comment about why they've got to add someone isn't just for us, but it's the fact that there are not close community-based mental health services available to even refer families to. There's a real absence of services in northeastern Connecticut, maybe all of Connecticut. And we do have a family member on the advisory board who has a daughter who receives mental health services, and they have to go all the way to Killingly, Danielson, to get any type of service.
Yeah.
And while that doesn't seem like a big deal to some people, it can be a huge deal for a working family to have to drive outside of their own community into northeastern Connecticut. It's like a whole other world for some people. So it's very exciting. There will come a point when they may require testimony at a town council meeting, or at least people there to say we support this. And I will try to stay on top of that. So thank you for that opportunity to do this. It's been a good
Thank
thing.
you. Boy, this is great.
Can I ask, and I'm sorry, I don't know, but what is the referral process to JRB, or how does that happen? I just don't, we never have it, right? So,
It's in the documents that were sent out.
okay,
There's pretty good descriptive
There's a whole
information.
description of the process.
specific to our
Yes,
board, okay.
yes.
Thank
The
you.
entire referral packet was sent out and in the various documents.
Okay.
And
Referral can come from the school, from the police, from town, and then a board convenes. The family will get a caseworker from that town.
Yeah.
So if you look at it, it's pretty,
Okay.
Questions that Jim had, couldn't be here this evening, but he's looking through all the documents, but in their entirety yet. One of the things that he wanted to discuss is just kind of the accountability piece. We know that, student, in order to be in this program, students have to admit that they've done something wrong. I think there's just a concern that a program like this there's an accountability piece, even though accountability may be less punitive and more, punishment becomes more restorative in nature. It's almost like a punishment. It's the crime of giving the student an opportunity to make good and to restore relationships and their status and, all of those pieces through, working with the support of the group. That, it's different than a court referral, but that this is a formal board. It's almost like, when you go through, I hate to say the expulsion word, when you go through the expulsion process, it's a very formal meeting. And it's, there's significant consequences, even though everybody sitting there is really rooting for the student to do what they need to do to get back on track again. So I think that was just a sentiment that, he's completely in support, and I don't want to speak too much for him. It was just, kind of what might the practices be as a part of this process that helps students understand that this is an accountability piece as well for a mistake made or behavior.
I would suggest that for that kind of detailed information, at some point, if it's appropriate, someone who's actually been involved in the process at least one time could come back and talk about it. But if you look at the flow chart that was sent out, it really does have loops in it that take into account all kinds of things, including whether the family refuses to participate, and kids can still get referred into the juvenile justice system if they don't cooperate with this. And I just in looking at the paperwork in general, and in fact, this office over here at least is paperwork heavy. I mean, they document absolutely everything, that there will be, all kinds of accountability built in. The question of who gets to know what when is very significant because of confidentiality and the rights that families and kids have. So I imagine, Lou, you and again, your staff will be intimately involved in that process when the time comes. But we won't necessarily get anything but number data if we ask for it in the future. And nor should we have to. At this point, well, I think this committee should follow this. It's not our agenda any longer to make it happen, because it's happening. I think we should take, yes, and we should take credit for this one and say we accomplished this.
No, I think Lou's right. We were a piece of getting this on everybody's, now, even if they were thinking about it, it was bad.
Oh, yeah.
And I was just going to ask a question. I know this is a state set of, following state protocols. Are the members of these review committees, are they sworn? They get sworn in, or the officer? Sorry, subject.
I don't believe so. I know I wasn't. I was sort of doing the group. But they're all, certified, licensed in some way, whether it's a school administrator, there's a police officer there, there's a DCI investigator there, there's someone from the state. So, it's not, you have to work in some capacity. You want to be agencies, either a town or school or police.
Yeah, and they're not inventing this. This is the program, right? This is all set up and follows the state protocols.
Yes, in fact, this is going to serve our three towns, but I believe Wyndham already has a similar model, and Columbia does. And many of our communities around the state already have this type of diversionary program in place.
Is it state funded? Funded through grants?
No, not to my knowledge.
Who pays for the caseworker?
The town,
The town
Service
does.
Bureau.
Okay, so the town's
They're already
involved.
employed. Everybody's already
It's a new
employed.
program.
Okay.
Yeah, in a sense, if the caseload got large, there'd be a whole bunch of volunteering going on.
Okay.
I had a question. Deb, have you ever seen this in action, or Lou, if you guys have been present for this? And,
Not here, in another town.
well, there, but does it flow fairly well, or do you meet little resistance? Or is it,
So it flows very well because it's not just student-based, it's family-based. And there's a case manager that keeps people. So it does. And not every case brought to this board would be accepted. So I think where Jim's going is, it's a very serious thing. The board may not accept this and say, this is a core issue. So each case will go in front of this review board. They'll look at all the circumstances differently. What we've decided we're going to do is the police and the school administration is going to agree to do a form together. So there's two agencies right off the bat that are doing that. So we have to have agreement at the beginning. But they do work well. Families, you know, our families almost always are saying, yeah, help us. You know, we're in the situation. It's not the first, you know, they're surprised, but not really surprised, you know. So they welcome help.
I was thinking more of the students, you know, like, how do, I guess it's, but that's good to know that you have the experience and have seen it, you know, people who are trained to not kind of focus stick. You know?
What's I think different now than what the experience when I participated was that was more old school, where it really wasn't the restorative component that kind of gets, I think, the student into deep reflection and their behavior. So when we saw them or when we heard a case back in the day, it was very court-like. It's just that the findings of that group were more restorative by nature, but there was a little bit less, I think, accountability on the part of the student, less then than now, to really recognize, acknowledge, reflect, and then follow through on where the board are. It was still successful in its time, but I think probably more punitive than restorative.
You ever noticed how pristine the picket fences are around local churches? We've moved on from that.
We have a garden club in town, by the way.
Well, this discussion leads us, I think, right into the next item. If you recall, when we voted at our April meeting in 2021 to discontinue the SRO program, that part of that motion included the administration putting together an alternative security plan for the school year we're in right now, which has happened. And it includes components that relate to the physical security, to emotional health and wellness, and addition of social worker. Is that homework position? Yeah. The community and but we also indicated that the board that the security staffing program subject to review no less frequently than annually by the full board in case before being reestablished. So while that is a charge that goes to the board, I think we on this committee were very involved in the SRO process and decision and analysis that led to continuing that program. What I suggested to Sharon is that we would like to at least check in at this point. See how we want this to be presented. Also, I would like it to be presented while we're still in the budget process, because I think some of the decisions here are going to be impacted. So I'd asked Sharon earlier if we thought that we could be read and have brought to the full March meeting. We'll still be within our budget. So for tonight, I guess the questions I wanted to address were particularly focused on the non-physical security and not, the replacement position necessarily for the SROs, but more on social work pieces of it that relate more to where we're looking, but also in the context of the whole picture and where you want to go next year. And how it's going to be go with the budget. And again, I'm looking for, if it's possible, to present a full report to some members. But I think what Sharon was hoping we can maybe give some guidance on some of the things we'd like to make sure.
Kind of data you might be looking for. So I think that there would be, this shift is complicated to a certain degree. There's multiple parts to it. So we do have, the social emotional side. So having someone like Omar who's working with students and families who might be struggling. Ultimately, that's both social emotional and behavioral. So the physical interactions of kids. Side. Hans being the coordinator of security and shifting into a more oversight leadership position, they're really making sure that that physical safety component, which contributes to the social emotional wellness of kids, if they feel safe, that they're going to, if they are safe, they feel safe, and as a result, socially and emotionally better adjusted. And then there's also the work that's being done in the long-range capital plan, or how do we continue to identify spots to use Kermit's recommendations from before I got here, they had provided to the district. How do we continually work on tightening up any soft entry points, building and make sure that we're having those upgrades to the facility so that security can be maintained. So, those pieces, that the budgeting piece, as far as the facility is concerned, is a little bit easier to get. Dennis has included that into this long-range capital plan to make sure that we're continually funding that. He's working with IT with that as well, because of the security cameras, the security system, and things like that.
That's sort of plan out.
So he's been pricing out, the one entryway that over by the superintendent's office, which is the soft entry spot. And looking at that to be a double buzz-in area, so typing that up so that the assistants in my office have an ability to talk to who's ever out there without physically going out there. Speak to them, determine what it is they need, and not buzz them into the building unless they have a specific purpose to come into our office. Otherwise, maybe she'd send them around to the front of the building to enter through the main security area, or security station. So that's the first step, that he has a plan in place for all of the areas of the building that need to be addressed. Budget permitting, but also a capital plan to, we put money, I think, from our last year's surplus into surplus security, national security. So he can certainly address that. And then Hans, he's in charge of all of our drills, and secures, he deploys the other folks who are our security folks to make sure that the perimeters are secure, the parking lots are safe. There's a lot of things that are part of their job, being out in the hallways, trying to find students if they have to be roaming, trying to figure out where they are and getting support. So say there's a female student who is supposed to be in class and has been in the bathroom for a bit, so making sure that security is getting in contact with Karen to say, come check on this young lady. So if you're looking for caseloads for Omar, you know, that's the other piece is he's working really closely with Lou on a couple of different, talk a little bit about that, in how they're identifying students and intervening with students who might be experiencing some.
I think that would be something that the board will want to hear. So, I don't know, Sharon, similar to it, stage, like to be thinking of the head. Some sense of where that's going. And I
You'll
think,
hear some of that in the budget proposal for this year.
good.
You know, the past 2 years, we've increased guidance counseling, school social worker. And we're proposing, Steve Bain has requested that we hire a second psychologist. For a couple of reasons, you know, if you're looking at ratio, the school this size, those folks are largely responsible for testing, the number of tests. Budget made it very detailed and well done justification as to why we need to have that support. So
Is that something you think?
I included it in the budget ask. And certainly will be up to, you know, the conversations that happen as we start the process, but it's, you know, I've made some initial cuts to get a number that didn't make it. But now I have to go to a second round. There's the head explosion number, and then there is the what's reasonable to bring forward budget book and have as a first proposal. Knowing that within that there will be some reductions.
Well, and then the other thing, of course, we'll check out.
That budget as well as we absorb all of our budget. Because originally that transition from security, from SROs to a security team was that position just, you know, transferring from security, which it still would have been more expensive to have another full-time position. So technically we had two part-time SROs, so a full-time security person and a full-time social worker. So his whole position at this point right now is in the operating budget. That's a position that was supposed to be in the operating budget to begin with. It fit the criteria of ESSER. It was perfectly fine for us to do it that way, but then we have some options for the length of time we need to take to absorb that position into our operating budget. But because there's other competing priorities for, you know, along the same lines, ESSER funds could be used in different ways. So there is an opportunity for us to talk about the ESSER funds and how we can use, because I did budget into ESSER, at least a part of it into ESSER.
I do think we want to make sure that we're presenting, I mean, I would like this committee standpoint, that we're presenting the security plan as including that this social emotional wellness is an integral part of it, and that it is not diverting funds from security. It's
Prevention, right?
And I think
Prevent.
that just leads to the next question. Somebody may ask, okay, so we had an SRO armed officer in the school. But we haven't this year. Have we noticed any, is there any data that suggests positives or negatives from the standpoint?
It's hard to measure, I would say, it's just because of COVID.
Yeah,
We're seeing behaviors ramp up across the board, and you know, all schools are. So I don't know if this is it's really valid data comparing the pre-COVID behavioral resistance to transition back into school after 18 months.
Well, I certainly think that COVID has only made it much more apparent. More we focus on well, guess the other question is that I think questions may come up that would be great to be able to address is, have we found that the relationship with the state police between our security staff is, working, how we spot, if we get someone there, if we can, I think that's one of the concerns that some people had, with any information.
Yeah, it's working fine. It is. The data, I think, is the absence of, so we are experiencing more suspensions. And these are mandated suspensions where by law you have to. But those typically go along with an increase in arrests, which we are not seeing. Okay, I think that having Hans, Dennis, and Omar come and speak with either this group or the board, you can ask them directly. Like the departments came in, they can do a quick, this is what I do, this is what I was hired to do, and then ask questions of them and themselves.
I would think that we try to do some full boards and just have them. And I don't know if that's possible. If not, I think we should still go ahead and have a report. And let them know.
Certainly ask, I know when I first came in, the SROs, School Hans and Mark at the time, put up very comprehensive report. I don't know how long that took them, but it was, really time consuming. So you can certainly ask them. If that's something, it doesn't do anything halfway. This doesn't do anything halfway.
But I mean, even if they could be available on Zoom, to be able to present, I think I don't necessarily think that we'll put together. Or just maybe we're going to afterwards. I think it's important to get a sense that this is working, this combination, this way we're addressing, because we have to decide, okay, we want to continue. I don't think it's going to be any serious pushback on that, but I think it's important to make this how
I think if you're asking them to come and just talk about what they do and how it's working, I think that's a sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and again, even if it's by Zoom, it's here, I would like, I don't know how other people feel, I would like to have the board have some input before we complete the budget process, because there are going to be decisions we're going to make. We don't want to put that on until they should really. So I think that will help.
Want to ask, talk to Tom and Dennis. I mentioned it to Hans already a while back, and I talked to Dennis already. And talked to him.
Yeah,
I think that would be helpful. Yeah, I think we'll have had a budget meeting for another one. I think a couple of weeks. So I think it would be a good time.
I think that in the previous budget cycles that we've had, Dennis has presented what needs to happen security-wise. It was already, he was already looking at those things even prior to us discussing SROs. And so I think, I think he probably has a plan, and maybe he just needs to kind of update that so we can all see that. Because I think that would be a part of this budget cycle. It has been for the past couple of years. So, definitely have it as well. So then the other pieces.
Just for the purposes of this committee and our interest initially in questioning whether we should continue to have SROs, I guess it would be safe to say that we're not missing armed state police in the hallways. Correct. So that's just for the purposes of this committee. I think it's important to say that so far we think we've made a good decision.
Yeah.
And that any police needs we have had have been met by the community police. Yeah. And then otherwise, we're working very aggressively as a school in general on overall school security, both physical and behavioral and emotional. And that's part of the package that they'll discuss. But I would say there's another one you can check off the list, Tony, in terms of this committee, because things are, again, there's momentum already happening and it's been transferred really into the hands of the school. Yeah. I don't think we're likely to demand the SROs back anytime soon.
I don't think the board is.
You blew it. Yeah.
That's been awesome.
Yeah, it's exciting. I have to admit that a couple years ago, when I really began to understand the whole SRO situation and are going pretty aggressively at ending that, first COVID helps make that happen. I had a lot of questions about the sanity of that in our world today, but I feel very confident about what's happened in the school at this point.
Just wonder who, I can think of a couple of people on our board actually who might come up with one person maybe doesn't keep up as much as possible. Another person is a lovely person on the surface but very conservative. So, you know, I'm wondering if they say how many instances, you know, one person's a real math person. You know, how many incidents. I think we need to be prepared with that. I really appreciate all the articles that were provided for us. Thank you, Tony.
Yeah.
Very much. And I also did some other stuff, but because it really was, you know, those of us who had had SROs in our schools, and they were very positive, and they did social work actually as well as they could, being a police officer. And we thought that was okay, but we learned it's not okay. It was not adequate, and the impact of a person wearing a gun in the school on our students that, you know, maybe we haven't considered. So it was a game. We've got a lot of education. So I think you're going to have to be prepared, even on our incredibly great board that we have.
We did have two people who voted against ending the program.
Right. So, I
So
mean,
unanimous.
and I think one is out of not really keeping up, being caught in the past, and another person where he presided as chair for the school board had some real reservations about mental health organizations coming into our schools. So I mean, it's a matter of education, perhaps, or helping people to see. But you might get some pushback or question.
Do we have any sort of is our SRO programs in Connecticut and
I don't. I stopped really paying attention when we were going through ours. There were a lot of conversations. I know that there's at least one pretty large municipality. I can't remember that moved away from it, but I think it was one of those sort of not on the headlines anymore. It just kind of went back to where it is. Yeah.
Well, it came back with the incident when there was a lot of violence, like around November, December, and a lot of police presence was called back to schools to help support with that. And I couldn't believe how quickly the pendulum just, like, it was all over the news that the police, you know, schools were calling police in, and I don't know, here we go again, but that seems to have died down a little bit.
So I mean, we have arrested more kids for breaking the toilet.
you know, and you know, remember part of the initial concern was an intruder, someone, you know, so first of all, the data is that's very, very unlikely to have someone who doesn't have some connection. So that it's focusing on your students and those who get in trouble, that's probably, I'm sure that's a much more significant way of identifying risks and dealing before it gets to that point. But I don't think that, I think the other day it was, it didn't matter whether you have necessarily or not,
That's
somebody from the outside was going to come in and still be elected.
I again think, the better use of our money is securing this building so
Right.
that, we have more control who comes and goes. And, a year later, we can all walk into that front door, for a late night meeting. And if you say, I'm nice to the guy in the front because I know him from the past,
Yeah.
even with the mask on. But it's just, I think that's where we really have to, work a little bit harder to get those things done.
Yeah, so, and I just think the other piece to kind of think about, consider, although we haven't started going down the road of social emotional wellness, that when you're regional, we're high school, district high school, we're getting students from so many sending towns. Having those conversations with the superintendents and principals of those other schools end up being really critical, having that communication. If you're in a K-12 district, you have a little bit more control over a progression of services with students as they go through. And it's exciting to see the conversations that we're starting to have now. We led a group of superintendents and principals around our data, looking at equity and equitable practices and how we're recommending kids for classes. And I'm meeting with superintendents to talk about our vision and graduate standards and that continuing expectations. So the social emotional wellness piece is something that every time we have those conversations around. That's the next step in those relationships is looking at the progression of social emotional services that no one understands what the needs are both academically and emotionally of the kids who are coming to see us.
I think they kind of identify that. And then don't want to forget, I think the historic diversion plan was a part of this. And the fact that all remember counts about right off that. I would like to keep this moving if we're focused on trying to get some sort of presentation on this. The next one is discussion of follow-up community forum, community outreach, and engagement opportunities. Lou, I know you have been all over this, and I know you put an invitation out. Have some point in the last year and a half been involved in forums or meetings, and I think it's important for us to focus on engaging the community. We can sit here and decide what thing is right for the community, but we need to keep that input. In that regard, I encourage student participation, registered students, or to decide they want to make a presentation or something that's a concern. And I think if we can identify groups in the community, I think it's, and Sarah, I think you'll agree, our involvement in literature advisory has been
It's amazing.
eye-opening for me. I would encourage other members of this committee and the board in general to get involved in some of these groups. And Lou, if there's any other ones you think you can gain, I don't want to feel like we're. It's a sort of an interest as a board member. You don't want to feel like there's board. I want to make sure it's done.
So we have Sharon and I went, we do have a parent group. There are, between parents and alumni, there's probably 40 something, and I have a listserv. So we met in December, and they want to do a meet and greet. And they want to invite interested staff, they want to invite you, and there's not really a meeting, it's just let's just talk about what we want to do as a group. So once the numbers go down a little bit, we'll set that up in here and they can count that as a meeting, I guess. I don't know, but they very clearly want to just talk.
I
So
think,
here I am, a person of color in this community, you gotta hear me. And that's what they want. They don't want this formal agenda that just, let's just sit around and do that. So we'll be happy to set that up.
that would be great. I think that's something I would really like to do. And again, I would encourage anyone. I have found that my involvement in this. Yeah, it's been a revelation.
It is. It's wonderful too, because, we can talk to, like Shante and Terrence and I have communicated through emails. And something's coming up with the NAACP. And I'm on the steering committee and we're trying to get a youth division. And I have steered it to be in an area, not in high school, so that the area can draw. So we'll see what's happening. But by the time you have your parent meeting with us, I might have something about that. And, there's just all kinds of groups. That people feel inclusive.
I also think and I've been sort of in this, I don't like the mix so far one of the Democrat. But those are wonderful too.
I didn't hear what you said, Julie.
The discourse.
Oh, yes, yeah. It's kind of hard to,
Yeah, we
now I
can't
know
do-
what it's like to, this.
You can't hear it all.
Huh?
Anybody listening in cannot hear
Yeah,
it
they
all
should, yeah,
from this room.
Do you
yeah,
want
it's
your
terrible.
microphone up closer?
I mean, that way it picks up everybody. They can talk a little louder. No, and I think that participation in those, continue to get notices of those. And I would encourage again, any member of this community to participate. Great guy sessions are great. People from the students, from the parents, people in the community, and, it's a little uncomfortable sometimes. Great. Those are things I think I'd like to do. I'd like to encourage us to do it. And again, I would look to, Sharon, to the extent there's other things that come up, let us know. If there's anything you think that, again, like just going to that professional training that several of us did.
Very, very nice to go.
People were thrilled that you were there.
Oh, I'm glad.
I don't know, I felt like a fish out of water sometimes. I was like, oh, I don't belong here.
No, I appreciate it because when people say things about, well, how does an EO do that? Well, let me tell you, do this, and we have this and that. What's going on in the classrooms is so amazing. This is a difficult time, certainly, but it is also, like in times of war, innovations pop out like you. It's amazing.
I was particularly, when we heard student present her art project that she
Oh, at LA Fitness.
finalisted.
It was fabulous.
And it was really one of the English teachers who kind of serviced this and presented this to the students. Great.
You have fabulous kids and teachers and you guys steering it at the helm.
And just to the point about PE Day and getting back to that original, had engaged quite a few of the alumni, like invited some of the alumni who had participated in that to be part of a panel presentation with staff,
Oh, that was great.
which everybody loved it.
Yes.
The teachers, it wasn't sunshine, it wasn't all sunshine and flowers, but it was done really, really well. And, the input from both the students and the alumni and the parents were really amazing. And it's, definitely a credit to I think the culture that Lou's created around the relationships that he's created around this work and making sure it's heard and that they're valued and that we want to hear the truth. Statements, because it's the only way we're going to get better. And we're wondering, what the next step is, like where do you take that next? But what a great group of involved alumni who are willing to put themselves out there and support. And I think that they're pleased with the progress that's been made and are on board to help. They know it's not done. We know it's not done. So it's that, on board to help support the next step.
I was really, I thought that was a great way to introduce that day, and I like the fact that there were very clear guidelines to our group saying, no questions asked, you just have to be able to receive this information and listen and keep your ears open to what people are saying, because it does, it gets, it's a little painful to hear, I think, even as a former parent or what have you, knowing, gosh, did you really feel that way? Or that experience wasn't so good and that's horrible. It's just, so at any rate, I think it was a wonderful way to start that day and a great eye opener. And I really appreciate the fact that they were able to share their experiences in such an open way. I think it was great.
And I appreciate the fact that our teachers, their feedback, for many of them, that was their favorite part of the day as well. And, in order to be able to receive that and to look at it in such a positive light, having the open-mindedness and the ability to reflect and to really value the words of students and former students, but it's not easy work. And so, that's something that, I'm really proud of them for embracing it.
I think that panel empowered other people to be themselves. And, we never should forget how isolating it is to be the only person of color or a gay person or whatever. And like I said, I used to get invited, or still do, to a lot of events by Pat. And she's very powerful and articulate. And finally, well, what do you want me here? Because when I walk in, I've got my friend with me. And it sort of helps me to break through the fact that I'm the only person of color going someplace, which somewhat flabbergasted me. But sure, I'll go with you.
Well, I think that we want to keep this moving. Hopefully we get it done fairly quickly. Leads into the other board equity for media for the training and follow up. See, I guess I would have to say, I would, again, I would encourage us to participate in the things that are happening in the literature advisory committee. I think actually Chris wanted us to bring someone along. So if anybody interested, it's an hour and it's well worth it.
It's the best.
I'll send it on to this committee. Get the next date set. But there are other things. I think the equity training session had was really helpful. It's a separate board retreat. I don't want to lose, again, I don't want to create work, but I do think that we're not done in the process. I think we tie that into also when we only had a few minutes at the end of our retreat to deal with the equity protocol.
Yeah.
And there was some sense we could set up a meeting where we could all kind of get together, as many of us wanted to. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to see something like that happen. I think there was interest.
Yeah.
That's a discussion item on our agenda.
Oh, good.
That is board meeting, so that we can follow up.
Okay, good.
But that would be a good spot. I mean, you're talking about, board equity training, that would be a good follow-up to do.
Yes, it
Because I
would.
thought that was a great tool, and I was like, okay, let's do it.
We ran out of time.
Let's do this process.
So can I hand this out real quick? I was hoping to get here. So this was at the very end, and this is, so if you recall training, let me catch you up, but there were a couple school districts that have developed a protocol And basically what you do is you filter your decisions through this protocol. And for this group, as policymakers, the current policies and future policies that you make have to hold up to these 5 questions, okay? So if you turn it over, you'll see the questions in bold, okay? And if you look at the top where it says policy, practice, action, program, those are examples, okay? But if you ask these questions of policies that you have, so an exercise can be, and I'm looking at the last thing on the agenda, member commitments for the next meeting, maybe you bring a policy that you think might be ready for this review. So we've got Janice, who's the chair of
Personnel.
personnel policy, Tony, you're here. So I'm thinking, does this group serve as that filter for any new policy, or do the subgroups do it themselves as a check and balance sort of thing? It's fascinating because it happened today. So the science department wants to offer electives, okay, for upperclassmen. So they did a survey, what would be interesting, forensics came up and genetics came up. And they have an idea to unlevel, okay? So what the thinking is that we're gonna take that out and anybody can just join, kids wouldn't be worried about their GPA, things like that, you can just take it, okay? So on the surface, it sounds great, but when you run it through here, you have to ask yourself, who might this negatively impact? And it might negatively impact B-level students who might get pushed out, okay? Depending on what the rigor is, or they may just see who else is in the class and then get out of there. So you have to ask all these questions. And this thing, I think it can work, and I think it's got to be part of all the process. So maybe you find, you know, the dress code is easy. It's 1 page. You just put dress code for girls. It needs to be revised. So I think that's where this group may want to focus its attention.
Is it too late to request uniforms?
Anytime the superintendents and the principals and the sending schools started to go through this process, looking at some of our data. And so I took the data that you all saw at the retreat, just around, you know, what classes students from sending towns were being either be recommended for, but to the point where also, you know, are they, did they stay at that level? Did they go up, or did it go down a level based on their experience? But it was a great first start to really get the dialogue started around a really good question. What is the criteria for an E-level class versus an A-level class? What's the difference? When, you know, it's a course that has the same standards, there are the same standards, curricular standards. So what is the difference? It's really great conversations happening at the department level when they're, you know, really approaching it in a thoughtful way to provide good feedback to the sending schools. And then, you know, each of us are doing some deep reflection, deep dive into our practices that kind of set the stage for, you know, the next level of discussion and conversation of who are we and where do we want to be and what's our next level of, you know, if we're unleveling electives, for example, let's take a look at what we're saying the obstacles are. Those are kind of the root cause piece that who's been taking the department heads through. What's really the causes of the things that we're seeing? Let's address those instead of, you know, fixing the problem. Well, if we unlevel, then everything will be equal and everything it'll be all good. But really, there's some underlying pieces that need to be addressed first in order to get to a place where it truly is more equitable.
When we say unleveling, it's not designated.
Doesn't go into the weighted out.
Yeah.
It doesn't go into.
It doesn't go into. So, hey, this will be great. So we'll get a good collection of kids that might not be in classes together. That's the hope. Will that really
The
happen?
question is the self-selection. If all of a sudden the top kids will sign up for it, are these students going to stay up, staying away from that? Correct. Or the other way around.
But the A levels don't want to take non-level classes.
But if it doesn't get included in the
Yeah, but they can take another course where it does.
Oh, where it does, and it includes stuff,
Yeah.
But before you put it in, we need to hash that out. So we have 3 examples tonight. One is in the statement where we didn't think to include gender. Then we have the track thing, and then the SRO, right? And it's because we're not trained, and this is what this can help us do. Just always ask who's is helping, who's is hurting.
Yeah, I think our, as a committee, I've always thought about what our prime role is, and we are as a board or policy maker, so I think our thinking about how policies reflect these values and principles. And also, we're here once we do agree on a course of action, supporting the administration in executing, and providing that level of support and we're behind you. Those are, I think, our 2 primary functions. We're not necessarily going out there fixing ourselves. We are trying to discover.
Well, we might need to do a little of
We
that.
might be doing some of that, yeah. I mean, but I think that's right. I mean, by kind of like getting this whole program for the restorative conversion.
I know, we're gonna have to get used
I
to
mean,
it.
yeah, I mean, I think we can take some credit for having put that on the table, and other people ran with it, that's
Right.
great. And some members were here, but that's what I think that's where our real value can be. So I think that's a great, I think I would like to have that for the convention. Or at least that somebody take on the fact there were a couple that are presenting 1 or 2 policies to. So let's,
Well, I'm thinking like dress code is one that would be an easy practice to go through, right? Like, do we bring in something like rating that is just, like, I think we should practice with one that we can apply this tool and do it pretty easily before getting
pick
into
one,
something.
we just do it together, and then we can kind of take a broader look. Or maybe take a couple, so ones that are not going to be like, yeah,
Naming
we're not taking out that. Well, I know, I mean, should we have a policy? Yeah.
Well, that's,
I mean,
we discussed something.
You'll judge that.
So I know that issue hasn't totally gone away, right?
Oh, no,
No.
no.
I'm happy.
Still being asked to the
Get a
outside.
handful, maybe we can just get a handful sent, and you can.
Sure, ones you think are worth taking a look at based on, what that would be great.
So I was thinking about now in terms of personnel, taking, we could look at a job description
Yes.
and put that through one of these, use the questions to evaluate the job description.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have.
That's what immediately came to mind for me.
Yeah, IT has just spent a year and a half revising theirs,
Yeah,
and updating theirs, and we have another, it's actually part of our budget proposal as well, but a proposal for a revision of the position.
Yeah.
So, it would be interesting too, if this personnel committee looked at jobs, we rewrote all the job descriptions for the front office,
Right.
Support staff last year. And so even looking at it through that lens for a revision process would be, okay, this is what we did before, we knew what we know.
yeah.
Now, now we know. So exactly. It's a good question as far as, so one of the things that, that the Connecticut Center for School Change, whatever the name is, tried to include the part in our equity retreat was just an introduction to the stuff that we've been going over as a school for the past couple of years, and really focus on managing for equity, and leading for equity. And so, do we need a part 2 to that? Is that something that we think the board would want? Is that something that this committee might get that next, version of it? It's certainly something that we should put together, to get into a little bit more depth into, I think, this stuff, which is the, how do we apply now what we know to making these managerial decisions?
That sounds like that's a great idea. I think we should open it up.
Yeah, I felt, and this goes back, I think, to, our equity training, that I guess I'm reflecting on that last session that I was in, and I felt like maybe the last session is where I wanted those next steps or us to start really kind of delving into that, and I just felt like we kind of got lost in the process or something, I don't know what it was, it just, or.
It was rushed.
Yeah,
It was
and-
a concentrated, experience, and actually Lou, where, took all of those resources and, created this out of those resources from Texas.
Yeah, they're starting.
Right. So really, I think they wanted to get there with us, and, we certainly can, if we have some questions, or if there's some specific things that you want them to address, they're really good to it. They're great to work with. So, they said they would come back anytime.
Well, I certainly think you have to go in the next step, kind of finishing that, because I think that managing and leading for equity is right where we need to be. We are, we're learning this, we're going. And so we help, it's great.
I will reach out, and then we can talk about what you best.
Yeah, so I think that, and we have the equity protocol participation that's on the agenda. Right, so that's on the agenda for the board, whether we want to pursue that.
Yes, yeah, if you want to, workshop. So
Yeah.
you're going to see it as a discussion item for a workshop.
Yeah.
Be voluntary.
And then, the other thing I wanted to touch on, and it's not like a real discussion, but we've heard now that the Department of Equity Action Plan presentation, are we done? Are we pretty close to done?
Yes, we're done.
We're done. And I guess my question is, okay, what I would be interested in is as we get through a year of this, how are you assessing outcome and how, what's the priority? I mean, it's just sort of a end of year report to assess. We've gone through this process. The process itself was, I think, good this year. But also that we have things that have happened, things we, unexpected or expected outcomes. I think I would like us, at least this committee, after hearing all that, kind of, okay, so that's all happening, so what happens? What's
Yeah, I can speak to that. So I met with each of them after, so we went through them all. And if you recall, that final column was about measures of success. As we were going through these, some of these were vague. So we met and just said, look, we need to revise this, we'll revise this. At the end of the year, what do we have? So I'll be able to produce something for you. I don't know if you want to bring them all back, but this is this is how far we got in this department, that department. So I do agree, and we met and said, what is something that we can accomplish this year?
I would like to see that at the end of it, when it's done, and also if there's any, any particular lessons learned or things to realize we have to do, I would like to get a report to the board really on that maybe cover. I think we want to stay involved in the sense of, okay, how did it go? How do we do it?
It really is an evolution. So last year, and it was I want to say it was in June, that we presented the 5 categories that we were charged with addressing as a committee and as a district. We worked with the community forum, the Black Lives Matter US, and we kind of gave an update. And a lot of it was just, here are our initial steps. And part of that was, the equity action plans had been started departmentally. So now you got to see them, evolve a little bit, get a little bit more detailed experience. And now we have the end result of this year. Like, what did we learn? And what did we determine through these action steps that we have in place? What were the outcomes? And then what does that mean for next time? What does that mean for how we continue this to next year? And some of the action items on the equity action plans are not necessarily a 1-year type of situation. It's just this continued growth as we move forward. So
We found that either realize unexpected. those are the kind, I think it's really important for us, you know, that I remember one of our members at the beginning said, well, you know, the purpose of this committee is to work ourselves out of existence. I don't really see that happening. I think it's that if we have to, this work doesn't stop. It has to keep happening. But there's so much work to be done. Hey, man, you can't just say, okay, so everybody presented and, you know, check that off, we're done. We're done, we're not done. That's just the beginning. I mean, we are still at the beginning stage. Which work is good. And I like the things we're talking about, because they're moving us now. We've been collecting information, data, we've been setting goals, we've been setting expectations. We've got a good.
We did just get a comment from Travis, from a parent, they can't hear us.
I've gotten text messages from people I know are out there, they say they can't hear anything. So this particular, and I've said that before, this doesn't work.
Yeah, and there's a budget, there are budget items for mics.
You need to mic up every table.
And I think, you know, my hope is that, you know, very soon.
Yeah, that would be,
I would love to have.
that would be the best.
I would love to have people, I mean, and I would expect to give them a public comment like we do our work at the beginning and the end. Because I want to hear what it is. And unfortunately, it's hard, I know. I know you've said when you're participating in these meetings.
It's this particular room and this setup. The town hall seems to have managed that. It's also the way you're mic'd. So I have a particularly loud voice, so it's not as, and I'm sitting right in front of the mic.
Yeah.
I think one of my texts was, we can hear you. But it's not a fair process if people can't hear.
That's
Right.
Do we have very many people that work on it?
I can't tell, Brady probably can.
Okay.
Live streaming.
Yeah, but even one person participating by Zoom.
Right,
And,
and so they're taking time, they care to be on, and
Well,
Speaking of equity and access.
yes.
Right.
I think that's right. I mean,
The miking might be, you know, individual mics, you know, or something along the tables, I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's what they
Especially if
do.
we remain in this room,
I think that's what they do at town hall.
yeah,
yeah, all of those, they have built-in mics.
yeah.
and tables.
I think it's done by 8. I don't know if there's any other things people want to talk about, other than I think that the issue of making our meetings accessible and participation is really important. And technically we are live now, but I understand how people are. But my hope is that would change, and we want, and I also think, Lou, again, I would urge if there's a particular parent group or interaction with that would like to come and propose to us or issue with us that concern, first put those on the agenda. I would be happy. So, I think in ending, you know, we decided back in June that we wanted to kind of identify member commitments. I guess first of all, they kind of review what we've done. So we have done an annual review of the guiding principles. We've adopted a resolution that align more directly with the State Board of Education, including gender, religion. We have it.
We did it.
On the JRB, which is now the restorative diversion. Really good news. I would urge Deborah to keep us posted on those.
Happily.
Standing things to kind of just tell us how things are going when we start getting some control. Specifically, confidential, just how it's being used, running smoothly. On the EGJ review of the school security program, we've given Sharon, I think, some information. Together, some sort of presentation forwarded to March meeting. Help us that we go through the budget process and evaluate some of
have just kind of an overview of what's happened with security, and then
Yes.
have Omar and Dennis
Yes.
answer questions.
Yes, so I think that would be good. A follow-up, community forum, I think Lou, you indicated that once, things are a little more, open, that would be great. I think it's a great idea. I would also on that, on community engagement, again, I would encourage members of this committee to participate, see any opportunities for participation from the discourse session. If we get those, I think everybody at the board gets those.
I tried to send this out.
The literature advisory board, I don't think we have a text date yet.
I haven't found it, but, you know.
I will send it out to everybody on this committee. If anybody else, like I said, we are sort of charged with bringing it out for some of it, actually.
It
So,
really is.
and I think we want to continue exploring community engagement opportunities. And if there's anybody on this committee who feels there's anything else we could do, just bring it to our meetings or let me know. And put it up. So I'd like people to think about that as a commitment, non-government commitment. Discussion of board equity training and follow-up. I think we have, Sharon, we talked about perhaps putting together talking to.
Yeah, I'll reach out to Mary and I was supposed to say Teresa, I thought the name was wrong. I reached out to them. They, let them know what we're looking for.
And again, to the extent that there are other particularly, I mean, any sort of PD training that you feel we might benefit from participating in, let us know. Again, Lou, if there's anything you say, and again, if there's anything, anybody else on the committee, that would like something, even if it's, sometimes some of these are online things, which I would be interested in hearing what anybody. We talked about the Department Equity Plan presentations and that there will be some sort of follow-up. Here, there's going to be a discussion or this issue of the equity protocol participation being a session that's on the agenda for the board. So I don't know that anybody's got any specifics on policies. You're going to send us a couple of policies. And all of us are going to look at those.
I like the job description idea. I'm just gonna keep putting that out there. I think that's just as important.
And finally, if anyone on the committee has any ideas they'd like to put on the agenda for future.
I know I just want to comment, we all talked about reading stamped.
Oh, yeah, we did.
Yeah, and just, I don't know if we want to at some point think about reporting out of that or even talking, as a group or somehow getting it. I mean, obviously, I'm not talking about a book club discussion, but I know that the school that was a suggested reading for the summer, and so.
And it's been sort of been introduced into the test grade curriculum, sure. So it might be, how do people feel about it?
I don't know, there's a lot of good literature out there. I mean, it doesn't have to be stamped, but,
There sure is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe what we can do is to think about, that me and Sharon and Lou, just the whole committee, any ideas they have of reading that might be beneficial to the whole. And then let's select those things for next week.
Yeah, how about online things? I mean, there are some fabulous things that are being presented, like, I don't know if any of you like the NAACP's one story presentation by Nigerian woman. He was very succinct, he was eloquent, and it really made you think, and it was 14 minutes.
Well, I would urge anyone on the committee, I've been doing a little bit of it, something like a Zoom online presentation that seems to fall into our area, that somebody just, they have an hour of time, just send it around. Decide if they want to do it. I think I would encourage all of us to do that. I had said I was going to send around something on this on February 8th presentation, which I knew you'd see, but I don't think anybody else has seen it. And again, this is the actually is the works in the Manchester school system in Harvard.
Send us
The river.
information about it.
That's everybody on this committee.
Yeah,
Yes, you
river,
did.
yeah.
Yeah, and I've heard him read. He's very involved in the Manchester school, but not in obviously a much larger population. Like 5,000 students, but he's a really interesting person, and I think it'll be a really interesting reading. And again, just read his book. It's not listen. He's a pretty compelling. He's done a lot of really been worth thinking about recent work. We're going to take that to COVID. Something that everybody's going to need. That's on February 8th.
I have one, I think, really positive thing to report about the curriculum here. My grandson took the genocide class this year that was offered. And I've never had him speak more frequently about one of his courses than he did with that course this year. So I hope it's going to continue, Lou. I mean, he really doesn't like to talk about school ever, never. And he talked about that course weekly. And he informed us. And he was very proud of what he was mastering and his, can you believe these things are happening? Yeah. So who taught this class?
Yeah.
Joe Goldman.
You'll
Yeah.
skip grad.
Yeah.
Who did, Joe?
Well done is all I can say. Well done.
We are very lucky that we had a teacher from the state of Florida that talk about the fact that she has to think about herself the legal risk when she sort of idea that anything that anybody uncomfortable, you can't eat. Anybody can decide they're uncomfortable, their kids are uncomfortable.
Well, all you have to do is look at your town, my town, probably some schools in this town. So it's very prevalent and it's unfortunate.
We have
You're
to-
lucky.
Yeah. Well, I think it's also good that the State Board of Ed kind of puts out there what their guiding principles are, so that at least gives us some backbone, where I don't think all states are like that, so.
No, but
Or they're actually working against.
Against it.
yeah. I mean, what's so interesting that the materials coming out of Texas and the other red states.
Yeah. it was
Yeah,
Arizona.
but there's individual communities in those states that have boards of ed that are throwing books off the shelf, so.
Yeah, that's right.
Can I
Crazy.
just ask, what's the next PD that the staff is going through in this area?
That, in this area, we have, the last one they had was in November. The next one that they will have is, actually, we had a great plan for it, and then we got some feedback from staff around, needs, particularly curricular needs. So we're meeting again with our professional development committee to say, we agreed on a plan together, to say, our CIAs, our curriculum instruction and assessment coaches, had sent a survey out to staff so that they could fine tune the needs of teachers. We got feedback that indicated that might not be what they need right now. And so it's we're kind of making a little shift to give them some time to work on the curriculum side. And then to also then have some time to work, a couple choices, either just or specifically individually on their professional growth plan. That is, we tried to focus all of the competing priorities to say your goal for this year is your goal for this year. So whatever you've chosen, whether it's connected to SEL or whether it's connected to student-centered learning, they're all interconnected under that umbrella of equity. Whatever you're working on, that should be your focus for this year. That you want to pick something and really start to feel confident and better at it. So they'll have some time in the afternoon to work with each other on that. We've also been meeting as think tank. Had 40 staff last week. It's all blurred out last week. Come together. You know, we've been meeting at least once a month for the past couple months to, you know, what's going on, how are you feeling? Initially, it was just a lot of sharing, which was really great to get an idea of what teachers were experiencing. This last one was more solutions based. So, and they asked for a meeting sooner rather than later, which I thought was great. And so they worked on identifying problem and then we're in the beginning stages of working down to some root causes so that we can problem solve together. So, you know, despite the fact that it's not formal PD, it's, you know, during our choice afternoons, 40 teachers could have chosen to be in their classrooms grading things, and they came to the cafeteria and worked collaboratively with each other to try and come up with solutions to some of the things that they're seeing. So there's that's going on. And then the next full day PD, supposed to be full day PD, you'll hear about that at the board meeting on Tuesday, is yet to be determined, but with a focus on kind of vision. You know, where are we now? Where are we going? Type of situation. So, and where does the equity piece come into that? You know, at this point, we don't have on the agenda right now a specific equity focus. Right now, what we try to do is everything that we're doing, how does this connect to equitable experience for kids? At some point, I would love for cultural response and back into play as a strategy. And there are teachers who are implementing it already. And all the social emotional learning work and getting to know students, know who they are, and fine-tuning your instruction to meet those needs. There are things like that happening in classrooms. So that would be probably the next logical step, is to, you know, what's that next level of work and support? We have to reach out to staff to say, you know, what do you need based on where you are right now. We try to keep things as focused as we can without being too scattered, so that, you know.
I'm hoping that we kind of stay aligned, right? Like Tony was asking, what are some things we can do, but we should try to stay aligned with the staff. So we're aware of what they're doing. And as you know, the curriculum writing for me asks, you're going to do those universal designs for learning, there should be part of that, but that can't happen in a year.
No, and we'll talk about that launch. We have a postponement.
Okay.
Yep, it was approved. So we have about a year and a half right now. And that's we have an curriculum inventory and audit that's been done. Teachers in every discipline have standards and performance indicators that they worked on last year. They fine-tune them. Great Schools Partnership is going to help them take a look at making sure that those are where we want them to be, especially as they want aligned to state frameworks and work. And then really coming away from this year, hopefully, most departments, led by the department heads, have some version of scoring criteria based on those standards and performance indicators. But those need to be, we want Great Schools to kind of help us process through those to make sure that they are, they won't evolve, because they will change and evolve over time as kids use them. We recognize where the shortcomings are, but, you know, are they ready to be used by students for self-reflection and for teachers to provide feedback? That's the goal this year for that goal. Thank you.
I would like to, do we want to talk about, I want to try to have a meeting in February. I don't know when you think you might be able to put that community together, which I think would.
Late February.
Makes sense for us to tentatively, or we want to wait until, if we get into March, we're really in the budget stuff, so I'd almost like to try to squeeze one. Maybe we can agree to short at that Tuesday. Sometime in February, at least tentatively. And I would ask if anyone has anything that they would like to propose to put on the agenda for any future budget now, once your budget.
Budget meetings
are. That's not really.
I think I wrote it down. Had on my calendar.
February 22nd.
And it's March.
And a regular March board meeting minute, March 8th, March 15th. Second.
budget review like every Tuesday.
Yeah.
March 29th.
Yeah, I mean, we could, if we could go to the end of March, so it have to be 2 months. In that regard, can you get the minutes out to us though relatively soon? And also, I don't know if we're getting down some of those things we talked about.
I tried.
Yeah,
I'll send them out to you.
Send it to me, I'll take a look at the compare with my notes.
I took a ton of notes tonight, so the question is it in English? I don't know. If I go back and I look at my notes, I'm like,
If you could take a first shot at it, then I'll take a look at it. I have some notes too. We can do that. And then
yeah, actually, I'm glad you said that, because the sooner I do it, the more we can cohere.
we get that out and then make, well, why don't we set a meeting for the end of March? March 29th. And with the idea that we may be able to have that,
So we're not having a meeting in February, is that correct?
would try to have the, well, it's budget.
Yeah.
So I had a budget meeting for February 29th. Maybe it just.
The 29th is not a day.
March 29th?
It's a week.
Oh, March 29th.
Yeah.
Can we do it a week? I can't make the 29th, but could we do it on Thursday of the budget week?
Yeah, 31st.
I mean, there is between the 22nd of February and March 1st. I mean, I don't know if there's something in between there.
We're not talking about March, then. What month is it?
That's like right at the end.
February 24th.
February 24th?
We kept it to an hour.
If you promise. Tony.
Yeah, if you promised, Tony.
Oh, that's Depot Gallery night.
Okay. Anything that week? 23rd? The day after a budget review meeting, I'm getting.
I can't make that.
Okay.
Wednesday the 23rd.
Well, when are we having our LAB? Is that sort of like the 17th or 16th or something? Usually it's the
Do we have
third
a
week.
date?
I don't know, but it's usually the third week.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, we can just say it's fourth.
I don't know. I mean, other than that, we really have to go out to the end of March.
Do we need to meet in February or should we just wait till March?
Unless we.
We don't.
Wanted to try to do one before our budget. It is a lot.
Depends on what you need to prepare for the.
Yeah, I don't think- I don't think-
How many revisions we got going on.
I don't think we want to do that. How about we just go for the end of March?
Yeah.
We'll just set some things that people need to do between now. And I guess, again, I'd like you to start thinking about things. After the agenda, if there's things you see that might be of interest to us online. And Lou, as soon as you get an idea when you can break with that meet and greet together, that, that may happen. I just
So
think,
are we setting the 29th? That's March 29th.
do that.
So there's not a budget meeting that night.
Right, or any other night, I mean, every other night that week looks open.
Spoken for?
No, it looks open.
Oh, okay, how about,
Monday is better.
how about Monday, the 28th?
That's fine.
Part of me. Yep, that's fine.
Is 6 o'clock okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
1 hour or you're feeding us.
Yeah, now it's gonna be 2 months out, so it might have to be longer.
All right.
No more than 90 minutes. So now we're gonna- No, I don't wanna have 2 hours.
You're bringing in cannolis, maybe.
Oh.
All right, we all have to be really, really disciplined and focused on it.
Yes, Tony?
I think we will.
Me too.
we all have.
resolution. Rich, take my motion to do.
Thank
Sarah,
you. You have a motion.
Sarah, motion,
And
Deborah, were you seconding that?
And thank you for your tirelessness. Thank you, Suzanne,